I was pondering what to talk about, actually. So I'm Phoebe. I'm one of the core team of DGOV, and I come to this through a non-blockchain route. I come through kind of decentralized community and an interest in networks. So I thought I'd just say a little bit. I really appreciated how Ella spoke about her journey into this whole world. So I thought I was inspired. I'll say a little bit about mine. I actually started life as a scientist, so it's working with biological networks and complexity. And so I think I've always been interested in understanding how nature organizes, how do we organize matter, and that very quickly translated into an interest in how humans organize. And I think I bring that scientist view, lens still to a lot of work of really believing in experiments, and so I fitted in very quickly with the people who are doing kind of doing iteration, and technologists and hackers and coders who kind of do things and test and design and test and learn. I've got some slides here that are from a talk about Enspiral. Hope to come onto that. That's the decentralized network and community where I really learned the most about how to organize in this new non-hierarchical networked way. And since then, it's been quite a journey. And yeah, so I like how you said this. We use this word governance a lot, and governance is extremely vague. But the way, and I really like that because I'm very interdisciplinary. So for me, governance is the perfect way for me to keep fingers in all the pies and still have some kind of term that makes sense of what I do. But I think most of us come to working on governance usually from a lived experience of where it didn't work, or where we realized we haven't put conscious intention into it. And so sometimes I speak about governance being a bit like this invisible, architecting something that's invisible. So usually, so when I was working in science, this is my story. So when I was working in science and I had a startup on the side, in the science world, I was working on technology, so on biotech, and I realized that nobody talks about how we do biotech. We were just doing it. We were just in the lab doing it every day. And nobody talked about how are we getting funding, who are we getting the funding from, how do we make decisions about what to actually research, all of this stuff. So that was the first time I realized I was asking my professor in my lab just yeah, why do we do science, and how do we, why do we do it, and how do we decide what's worth researching, and how do we decide how to allocate funding? And he was just that we just do it. There was just a way of doing it. This is just the way we do it. And people weren't asking those questions. And then on the side, I had this education startup that I started with a group of friends. And we were young and naive and age 22. And we wanted to run the startup in a non-hierarchical way. We were we've been hearing about this innovative way of doing things. We're going to do this in a new kind of cutting edge way. And the whole thing was completely chaotic and awful. And so that was a lived experience of wow, you kind of think that doing things without hierarchy is going to be easier, or you think that you just kind of work it out on the fly. But actually, what I've learned in the process is that it actually takes a lot more work, a lot more personal work, and a lot more intention. So yeah, so during that journey, when we kind of set out on doing this non-hierarchical way of organizing that startup, I realized there's basically no resources present, very few resources present for people who want to do things differently. So that kind of got me on this journey into working with Enspiral, because I realized it's basically this tiny niche subject. You have whole business schools and entire MBAs on how to build companies, but you have basically nothing like that to build co-ops or to build different ways of organizing organizations. So what really excites me about the blockchain space is I come from tech and nobody was asking these questions about governance, but suddenly there's been this new technology that's come out, or not so new, but pretty new. And it's the first time I think that a technology has prompted people to ask questions about governance. And so in the blockchain scene, people are yeah, blockchain governance. And suddenly people are also asking okay, well, we can talk about how to do governance with blockchain, but we're not asking the questions about how we govern our technology. So it's this, I think we're having this interesting double think and noticing that we're focusing so much on the kind of technological governance and not asking the questions about how we govern the technology that does the governance, if that makes sense. So I'm really enjoying these new conversations around governance, but I think part of what I bring into the space is an appreciation that it's quite an old discipline. So like there have been, many decades of work and research on things like cooperatives, which Ella spoke about. There are like old non-hierarchical activist networks which have been trying to do this kind of new way of governing and organizing. There's like kibbutzes in Israel and eco-villages around the world, and there's a lot of really interesting models out there where people have been doing this without technology. And so what brought me to Enspiral, and what I was thinking about this talk just before, and I had like an aha moment, which is like, okay, so blockchain governance, like web3 is allowing us to think about like governance in a new way. But actually Enspiral, I think, was made possible because of web2 technology. So it's almost like Enspiral to me is like a web2 DAO, and now we're looking at web3 DAOs and what's possible using these new technologies. Enspiral made like a first leap to using kind of web2 technologies to organizing differently. So I'm going to spend the next like 4 minutes talking a little bit about Enspiral. Please just raise your hand if you actually have like quite a good working knowledge of what Enspiral is and how we organize and all of that stuff. Okay, not major, but okay, like 40% of people. That's great. So this is just to give a little like inner workings. So the fact that it was a new thing. So Enspiral was a very new thing, like a decade ago. It was a very new concept of like, can we run a digital organization? Like, can we run an organization using digital technologies, like making decisions while all of the members of a company are all over the world? This is relatively like quite a big leap. And then we're already making the leap now in these conversations about, can we kind of scale that to like millions of people who have never met before? So it's like, for me, it's really interesting having been part of this first experiment, which is like the tiny step. And then we've got this massive leap into like, could we do like global governance using these scalable technologies? So Enspiral is basically a network. It's a networked organization. It's a decentralized network. We've got roughly 150 to 160 people, which is interesting because that's Dunbar's number. So again, interesting that Enspiral has been kind of operating at its maximum capacity of trust. And there's been a lot of conversations about forking the community, so starting a new Enspiral in Europe, but it hasn't happened. And, like all of that, like the difficulty of getting human beings enough engaged in a decision as big as shall we fork Enspiral is really difficult. So it is interesting to me to see like what these technologies that could allow scaling and allow forking to just be like the click of a button. Like there's a lot of cynicism in the world that I come from of like, oh, these blockchain people are like talking about this thing like it's new, blah, blah, blah. But actually there are like new capabilities that are enabled by the technologies that we talk about here. So that's exciting. Very little time. This is Enspiral Summerfest. So I'm just going to quickly, very, very quickly, just speed through some slides, just quickly to give you an idea of how we did governance, how we did decision making and budgeting, because we did this all in a very collaborative way. So this is my standard slides. It's usually in a kind of future of work. The way we work could be different kind of context, but let's go past that. So this is the kind of mission statement of Enspiral. How do we help to support people in building great livelihoods together, working on problems that mean the most to them, solving great challenges of our time, becoming our best selves? So the idea of Enspiral is really getting people to work on more things that matter to them. And we used to kind of joke that people would leave their full-time jobs to come and work for this like crazy networked organization that doesn't actually have like a building. It's basically all held together by these online tools that we created ourselves in Enspiral. So we're a self-organizing collaborative entrepreneurship ecosystem made up of entrepreneurs and startups, and we share resources, decision-making, knowledge, and unlock collective intelligence. And what I think is quite important is that Enspiral was founded by a group of people who are mainly software developers and hackers, and had this kind of mindset of open sourcing everything. So we've been doing like really good documentation from the beginning, and I think for me, that's one of the things that really made Enspiral unique, is like there are a lot of like interesting networks and collectives out there, but because we had so many technologists, we, from the very beginning, kind of treated it like a tech project that was like iterating, experimenting, documenting, open sourcing, and using technology to scale. So these are like very rough numbers. I think they're pretty inaccurate, so take it with a pinch of salt, but like 160 people, we're all around the world. There are roughly like 20 startups that have been created in the last decade of Enspiral. People who are not kind of naturally entrepreneurs, like leaving their jobs, being supported to start a company, start a venture. So it's really a peer support network for entrepreneurship on kind of social impact and environmental impact. I think I have 15 seconds. So this is how we do governance. We have like a big pool of contributors. I think this is one of the very important design patterns of Enspiral, is that we have members who are people who are really like stewarding Enspiral, stewarding the kind of like the spiritual like core and like the culture of it, and like stewarding the organization. So they're people who have made a commitment. They make decisions that they're the people who will make decisions that kind of affect Enspiral long term. But as much as possible, we try and include our whole organization. And we have like 20 ventures. So it's this ecosystem of people and startups. And we're an Enspiral foundation, and like technically each of the members has got like a symbolic ownership of the organization, but it's not like a share in the traditional sense. It's more like a symbolic share. Okay, so time. We make decisions using Lumio. Check out lumio.org. It's the kind of like the old school decision making. Now it's kind of old school. Now it's old school in this context, but essentially it's like it's a place where you can make proposals, you make decisions. It's all very transparent. You can go back and track the decisions that you make in your organization. We do finances using Co-Budget, which is this collaborative budgeting, participatory budgeting tool, which is like an internal Kickstarter. And actually, the guys at DAOstack work with 2 Enspiral members to create Alchemy. So Alchemy is directly kind of built on what we learned in Co-Budget. And we have very, very rich resources and kind of practices around culture. So we developed like a lot of really interesting protocols and patterns and how to do distributed culture, distributed leadership. So catalysts are what we call our leaders. There are roughly 2 or 3 in Enspiral at any time. They're the only people who are kind of paid full-time or half-time by Enspiral. And they practice what we call servant leadership. So they are, taking care of the organism, the organization. They're really there to serve the members, and they're not kind of top-down leaders at all. And we have a big focus on like nourishing relationships. We believe that conflicts occur because of not kind of investing enough energy and time into building the social field. We open source everything, and I've got to stop. But here you go. You can get in touch. That's our website, and happy to chat more. And here are some interesting books if you are interested in this topic. This is done by someone who's kind of close to Enspiral, not part of Enspiral, but really, really interesting handbook for these kind of protocols and practices of horizontal leadership. And this is the Enspiral book, Better Work Together, that's just come out, like stories from Enspiral. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to the workshop in September. Could you deep dive quickly in the role of catalysts? Catalysts. Yeah.
Yeah, so catalysts were born from a need that we noticed that basically within a kind of distributed network like Enspiral, often the kind of tasks that are boring, or like the kind of care work tasks, or the tasks of connecting people together within an organization are dropped, like no one's taking those up. So actually in these kind of in a perfect world, all the tasks would be like perfectly distributed and it would be great. But what we saw was that we need to like resource a couple of individuals who kind of actively work on Enspiral. So they work as a kind of steward of the health of the organization. So the kind of things they do is they curate a really good newsletter every month where there's like a video, like they do like a video saying like, these are the things that have happened in Enspiral this month. These are the opportunities. Like they connect people together with needs and opportunities. They keep all of our documentation up to date. They're kind of go-to people if you have like a problem or like a conflict, you can go and they'll help you kind of connect with the right people to sort that out. They're kind of like the leaders at a certain time, but what's really important is that we cycle power. So we make sure that catalysts don't stay in their positions for longer than like 2 years. Usually it's more like a year. So that's a very important thing because we recognize that people in leadership positions get a lot more context than everyone else. So that's like a little power hierarchy that starts to happen. So if we cycle that, then everybody, then we can cycle that power increase. Does that make sense?
Can you speak about the core teams that are actually holding a lot of the sort of stewardship of the community ecosystem and making the engines? Actually, like the core teams, the people who kind of get things off the ground and really support the catalysts and everyone else who's actually making everything happen.
We don't really have core teams. So we have the catalysts, we have working groups. So for example, I'm part of the Catalyst support working group. So we have a call every 2 weeks with the Catalysts, and we just offer them support and advisory. So I guess that's like the equivalent of like an advisory board. And then we have like a minimum viable board who makes the kind of red button decisions and makes sure like financially that everything's okay and that we're not doing anything illegal. But we call it minimum viable board because again, we don't want to have a board of people who are seen as like more important than everyone else. And we kind of organize in working groups, which are just basically Slack channels. We have working group on co-budget. We have like we have a Europe working group. I mean, Sonyi, can you remember any more? Ambassador, yeah, we've got an ambassadors working group, people that go around and give talks. Like I'm an ambassador, and an engagement working group, so working on how can we keep people in the network engaged. A gatherings working group, so the people that work on the retreats every 6 months, which are a kind of core cultural pattern of Enspiral. Does that answer your question? Great. I should keep myself to the time, so I'm available always to talk about this stuff. Great, thank you.